Welcome to another Build Day Live video. I'm Alistair Cook, we're here at Cohesity, and I'm joined for this video by Chris Colotti. What's your role with Cohesity?
I'm a principal technologist with the Technical Advocacy Group.
And long-time community member, very active for many years in the community. This video, we're going to look at deploying the Cohesity data platform somewhere different. So in the live stream, we're deploying on a physical appliance. I've done videos with virtual appliance. We're doing Cloud Edition. How does that work for us?
Yeah, so one thing we released with Helios recently is the ability to deploy the Cloud Edition from the Helios UI. Previously, there was a little bit of a manual process to go through with each cloud, and it was a little different for each cloud. So what we've done is we've simplified that process, and today we can do it directly to our AWS account. We're going to actually go through the process in a few screens, deploy it into our EC2 instance, and then when it's all done, we'll configure it as we would any other cluster and reintegrate that cluster back into the Helios management platform.
And that's been one of the consistent themes around having the same software, the same functionality across these different platforms. And the simplicity of deployment, again, that constant theme of simplicity. Okay, so let's take a look at that process.
Yep, sure. So you can see here I've actually logged into my Helios account. So we are using a production Helios environment. And we can see my dashboard and all my clusters that are integrated into this environment. But what I want to highlight is under platform, if we go to data platform for cloud, we can see we've done a couple of previous deployments. But under our deploy menu, we have AWS, Azure, and GCP are grayed out, but that means those are coming soon. So today we're going to actually do it to a live AWS account. And we can see when we first start this off, it's 3 steps. So the whole idea for this was to simplify everything, do it from the one UI, and make it easy for everybody. So the first thing we're going to do is select our region. So ours is running in Northern California. And we're going to grab our access key and secret key, which will be removed when I'm done with this.
And this is just used at deploy time. These credentials aren't used after the deploy.
Correct. One thing I do want to point out before we do this is there is this link under IAM policy that if you go through and read this, your service account or the IAM user that you're using, we want to copy this JSON over to a new policy, which real quickly I can show that we've already done that. So our user already has that policy associated with it. And we did that yesterday. So we set this up, but we actually want people to know that it will fail if you don't have that exact policy created. So our particular user, you can see here, we've created a custom policy with that JSON file. So it's a matter of just copying it to a new policy.
And that's an absolutely standard security construct on AWS is to use these JSON security documents to grant rights.
Yep. So the first thing that will happen is we give it the access key and secret key. We got to give it a name. So we're going to call this Build Day Live CE. And the first thing I'll do is verify it. So once it verifies that we can get access, it'll give us the next step in the process, which is actually picking which VPC, networks, things like that. So we've actually got 2 VPCs. We got our lab VPC and one we call our events VPC. So we'll actually stick this one in our lab. We'll use our West 1A zone. We've already got security groups created for this. And you will notice that we actually are pulling through the logical names, the descriptive names, so it makes it a little bit easier.
Was that security group automatically created? Or
no, that's one we've had created for a while.
Okay.
So we have so let me describe the lab a little bit. So we have our colo environment, which is where we run our physical appliances for all of our demos. We actually have site-to-site VPNs to AWS, Azure, and GCP. So these networks and these security groups have been pre-configured to allow traffic via VPN. So when this is done, we're actually going to hit it on a local IP address to configure it from the VPN through our co-location center. So this is how we would normally do it for a real customer, right? Yeah. We don't expose, the security group doesn't expose it to the internet or anything like that. So it's all privatized. And then if we actually hit continue, now here we can actually, this is where we're gonna name the cluster. So this is the cluster name as you would, on a physical.
As we'll see that bootstrap process that we do through local link discovery when we're configuring a physical cluster. We're doing that here in the GUI.
And this is something we want to point out too, is there's in this UI, we have 3 different sizes we can deploy. So there's small, medium, and large, but you'll notice that small is a 2 terabyte, medium is a 6 terabyte, large is a 12 terabyte. So customers can pick, which size they want. It's not going to change the size of the EC2 instance. It'll always be deployed as the same EC2 machine, but the storage will be different.
This will change the size of the EBS volumes
exactly,
behind it, and therefore the additional monthly cost.
Right. So for our purposes, we'll do small. And you can do less than 3, but you'll notice you'll get a notification that says it's really only allowed for a POC, because obviously we need at least 3 for a cluster. So we'll actually do it as 3 just to get it all deployed so we can see the multiple nodes. DNS servers, pretty standard. We'll just, for purposes of this, we'll use the Google servers, NTP setting, and we actually have a domain for this, so we'll call it cohesity.xyz. We won't turn on encryption, right? So this is all that's needed to deploy it.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, exactly the same information as in the standard wizard,
Exactly.
other than the IP addresses don't need to be set in here.
Only contain, can't have the dash, sorry about that. So once we actually hit deploy, we can look at a couple of things. This is going to take a little bit to deploy. We can watch some of the initial initiations, right? So we can see that it was, the shared image was presented to my customer account. We validated the template. And next thing that's going to happen is it'll start actually deploying the CloudFormation template. So if we actually go over to our AWS account and look at CloudFormation, we'll actually see that this template is now in progress. And we'll actually push some of the CloudFormation updates over to the log, so when it's all completed, we'll actually see the whole process in the log.
But it's open to us to see what's happened in CloudFormation. We have all of the normal CloudFormation logs telling us what's going on for our auditability.
Yep. Yeah, so the user at this point doesn't have to do anything. Once they've created the user, the JSON, the keys to provide to Helios, the deployment is just going to continue. So yeah, we'll have to let this run for a little bit and we can look at it when it's done.
Okay. So you won't notice the time pass, but it's going to be a few minutes for us to wait. Well, the deployment has completed, so what do we see in the logs, Chris?
Yeah, so once we look back at Helios, we can see our success status for the deployment, which is always a good thing. If we expand on this, we should be able to see that we have our CloudFormation template information that was pulled through. If we scroll down a little bit, we'll see that we started executing our IRCLI command. So the whole process is completed step by step. So we get the nodes deployed, then we actually go in and do the cluster creation. There's still going to be a couple things we have to configure, which we'll do that in a second. But finally, we can see all of our node IPs and everything is up and running and all the services are there. So at this point, we can exit from Helios and go back over to EC2 side so we can grab our IP addresses to actually finish the configuration and kind of show that they've been deployed. So if I toggle over to our instances tab on EC2, we can see now that we have our 3 nodes, which we've actually applied the names, which is
a nice
feature.
You don't always see.
No, and I was actually pleasantly surprised to see that myself. So we know where to find them. If this was a much larger environment, we'd know where they were. But for me, I could get it from either screen. I had the IP addresses on the other one, but I'm just going to grab and copy this IP address, which is accessible via my VPN. So I'm going to open another tab, and we'll go over and just copy that IP address in. And what we'll get is our login. Now, we've actually already applied the license to this, but if this was a brand new deployment, like on the physical, the first screen would come up with the end user license agreement. And so we've already done that, and we're just going to log in with the default credentials. And we can see that now we've got our cluster name. And I want to point out, whenever we do the CEs, you'll notice there's a cloud icon, so you know it is actually a cloud-based deployment of the software. And if we go to our cluster view, the first thing it's going to tell us is we need to create a partition. So we'll have to take care of that. But also we can see here that it's hardware-based AWS.
Right.
So
more indications.
More indications that this is in fact a cloud edition. So what we're going to do is apply a default partition name to this. Default partition. We'll give it a host name. So in this case, we could tie this back to our Active Directory environment for authentication, but for demo purposes, we'll call this bdlce.lab.cohesity, if I can spell right, .xyz. And the key here is when we click Add Nodes to Partition, we should see all 3 nodes that we actually deployed. So this was part of that cluster creation. It added these for us to apply to the default partition config. So we could add 1 or all of them. We're obviously going to add all of them. So when we do an upgrade, we'll have our redundancy that we need. Now we can see that our nodes and their individual IP addresses are here. We've got some basic information on discounts, and we can now create this partition. So you'll notice now it's going to bring us to adding a storage domain. Now this is a little bit different than what you guys are doing on the physical. Some of this is already done for you. I think we actually apply the default partition in the default storage domain.
First run
exactly.
Config in the, before we do this cluster logon phase, that piece gets done.
Right. So it's a little different in the CEs. I think it's the same in the VE when you did the virtual edition. I think we also have you create the cluster partition and storage domain. So here we're just going to again do a default name. Wow, I'm not spelling well today.
It's because people are watching. I'll look
Yeah,
away
it's
while
all
you
right.
time.
Storage domain. Now we can assign this obviously to our single default partition. We're going to turn on deduplication and compression. They're on by default. It's one of the features we have is you can enable and disable these on the fly if you want. And at this point, these last two steps, now this cluster is technically ready to create jobs, point it to sources,
yeah.
and actually start doing protection jobs with it. So the final step we'll do is we'll actually bring this into that Helios account that we use to deploy it. So if we go back real quick and toggle over back to our Helios tab, we'll see in the cluster dropdown, this name doesn't exist yet. So we want to actually bring this back in so we can manage it in our central management platform. So that's really, really simple. There's a Helios button up here. You can see it's not green, it's unchecked. We're simply going to click on that and then enable Helios. And I think you've done this in a couple of videos before. But we'll be prompted to authenticate to our Helios environment. And once that's done, it will simply come back. It'll go through the connectivity steps.
Data up to
Exactly. We'll get our clusters now connected to Helios. We have our green check mark. And if we come back over to Helios and do a quick refresh, we should get that cluster now added into the top of our list. So now we can manage this.
Just like any other Helios managed cluster.
Exactly. And then we can use Helios now to actually do our protection jobs against that cluster in context. And you can see here there's no jobs yet, but it's ready to go.
Excellent. So that was a pretty painless deployment. Very similar to deploying physical or virtual edition. But of course, now we're deploying out on AWS public cloud, and potentially in the future, we're expecting that Google and Azure will join that as deployment options.
Absolutely.
And that's still just in our general fleet of Cohesity clusters managed all through Helios.
Yep.
Nicely nice. One of the things we discussed off camera was the use of DNS. As we ran through the wizard, we configured to use Amazon's Google's
DNS.
public DNS, the sort of most universally most reliable DNS that we have out there. But in a deployment for a customer, you'd typically use their DNS, so you'd use their...
Yeah, so one thing I'll show quick, because I think we probably can't show this in a live stream, but in this lab it's valuable, is if I actually go locally onto a different cluster, for example, let me go to my other AWS cluster we have, which is, I just need to grab the name, AWS COH01. And I'm going to do this directly on the cluster because I want to show something different. If we actually go to cluster settings, to your point, yes, this is running in AWS. I have my VPN tunnel. These are my two DNS servers on-prem, back in the colo. So the reason we did that is we've got enabled on all of these clusters, the way we do it in our lab, is we have Active Directory enabled. So in order to have the Active Directory connection, we need to point to the right DNS server.
Active Directory DNS.
So if you were a cloud first customer and say cloud only, you may have DNS running in your cloud for other purposes. You might be using Active Directory DNS. There's Azure AD, there's a number of ways to get your directory services for authentication. We do it all through AD on-prem, so we just send that all back through the tunnel. We could obviously stand up an AD server in AWS and point to that. It's part of the design consideration because we do specifically, if I actually log out of this cluster, we do log in with our Active Directory credentials. So we want all of our clusters in our lab AD integrated, which is what most customers would want.
Yes,
so yeah,
absolutely.
we use the Google DNS just to get through that screen, but we would go in and change that at this point, or we would have done it originally so we could add AD.
Great, excellent. Well, thank you very much, Chris. And thank you for joining us for this Build Day Live video at Cohesity. Stay tuned for more great Cohesity Build Day Live content.